The little girl looked up from her bowl of steaming tomato soup just as a pair of polished black shoes stopped beside their table. Can I sit with you? A calm, elegant voice asked. Daniel Carter raised his eyes in surprise. Standing before him was a woman he recognized instantly, not because he followed celebrity news, but because her face appeared on the front page of almost every business magazine in the country. Eleanor Ashford, founder of one of the world's largest technology companies. A billionaire whose charities funded hospitals, schools, and homeless shelters across the nation. Yet today, there was no crowd surrounding her. No photographers. No security team pushing people aside. She wore a simple black coat, her hair tied back neatly, and carried a tray holding nothing more than a bowl of soup, a bread roll, and a bottle of water. She looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Daniel glanced around the shelter cafeteria. Every seat was occupied. Families escaping difficult circumstances shared tables with elderly veterans, unemployed workers, and volunteers serving the evening meal. Before Daniel could answer, 6-year-old Lily beamed at the stranger. Sure, she said happily. Daddy says nobody should eat alone. Daniel smiled at his daughter. Looks like you've already been invited. Eleanor laughed softly for what felt like the first time in weeks. Thank you. She carefully placed her tray on the table and sat across from them. For a few moments, nobody spoke. The sounds of spoons tapping bowls, quiet conversations, and children laughing filled the room. Finally, Lily broke the silence. My name is Lily. I'm Eleanor. I'm 6. I'm considerably older than 6. Lily giggled. Daniel couldn't help smiling. You've made a friend. I can see that, Eleanor replied warmly. She noticed Daniel's volunteer apron. You work here. Only on Thursdays. What do you do the rest of the week? I'm an HVAC technician. You repair heating systems and air conditioning. Mostly emergency calls. It must be difficult. It pays the bills. He said it so casually that Eleanor almost missed the quiet dignity in his voice. There was no bitterness. No complaint. Just acceptance. Lily proudly added, Daddy fixes everything. Daniel chuckled. Not everything. Almost everything. Eleanor watched the father and daughter exchange smiles that needed no explanation. Something about them felt peaceful. She hadn't experienced that feeling in years. What neither of them knew was that destiny had already connected their lives long before this meeting. 5 years earlier, Daniel's wife, Sarah, had lost her battle with a rare illness. The months leading to her death had changed him forever. He remembered sitting beside her hospital bed while machines beeped steadily through the night. Sarah had squeezed his hand weakly. If anything ever happens to me. It won't. It might. He couldn't answer. Tears had already filled his eyes. She smiled gently. Promise me something. Anything. Don't let my death be the end of your kindness. Daniel frowned. I don't understand. There are people out there praying for miracles. She paused to catch her breath. If you ever have the chance, become someone's miracle. Those words stayed with him long after she was gone. Months later, while dropping off paperwork at the hospital, Daniel noticed a poster asking for living organ donors. He stood there reading it for nearly 20 minutes. The statistics were heartbreaking. Thousands waited. Many never received the call they desperately hoped for. Without telling anyone, not even his closest friends, Daniel completed the medical evaluations. The doctors explained every risk, every possibility, every complication. He listened carefully. Then, signed the consent forms. His only request was simple. I don't want the recipient to know who I am. The transplant coordinator looked surprised. Most donors eventually choose contact. Daniel shook his head. If they're healthy, that's enough for me. Several weeks later, doctors found a perfect match. A woman in critical condition. Daniel never asked her name. He underwent surgery quietly, recovered without seeking attention, returned to work, and never mentioned it again. Life moved forward. Or at least, he tried to make it. Across the table, Eleanor slowly stirred her soup. She studied Daniel without being obvious. His hands were rough, scarred from years of repairing machinery. His jacket showed signs of careful stitching along one sleeve. His boots had clearly been repaired instead of replaced. Yet Lily wore clean clothes. Her backpack resting beside the chair looked brand new. Children always came first. Eleanor noticed details like that. Years of building businesses had taught her to read people. And everything about Daniel told the same story. He sacrificed for others before himself. It reminded her of someone. Someone she had spent years trying to find. 5 years earlier, Eleanor had been dying. An aggressive kidney disease had progressed faster than doctors expected. Despite unlimited wealth, despite private specialists, despite experimental treatments, nothing worked. One evening, her physician entered the hospital room with tears in his eyes. "We found a donor." Her heart nearly stopped. "A deceased donor?" "No. A living donor." "Who?" He requested complete anonymity. She cried harder than she ever had. Someone she had never met had willingly accepted surgery. Accepted pain. Accepted risk. Simply so she could continue living. She begged the hospital to reveal the donor's identity. They refused. She hired investigators. Nothing. She donated millions to transplant research hoping somehow the donor would come forward. Nothing. For 5 years, the question haunted her. Who had saved her? And why? Back in the shelter, Daniel stood as another volunteer hurried toward him. The heater in the children's room stopped working again. "I'll take a look." Lily smiled. "Daddy fixes heaters here too." Daniel laughed. "They deserve to stay warm." He disappeared down the hallway carrying a toolbox. Eleanor watched through an open doorway as he knelt beside an old furnace. Within minutes, children who had been wrapped in blankets began smiling as warm air returned to the room. One little boy hugged Daniel around the waist. "You're my hero." Daniel simply ruffled his hair. "No." He pointed toward the volunteer serving dinner. "Heroes made your meal." Then toward another volunteer sorting donated clothes. "They found everyone warm jackets." Finally he smiled. "I just tightened a few bolts." Eleanor stood frozen. How many people would refuse credit so naturally? She had spent years surrounded by executives eager to claim every success. Yet this man avoided praise even when he deserved it. Something inside her shifted. She had originally visited the shelter because anonymous reports suggested donated funds were being misused. She intended to inspect financial records, interview administrators, review budgets. Instead, she found herself watching one ordinary father quietly changing lives without anyone noticing. When Daniel returned, wiping grease from his hands, Eleanor asked softly, "Why do you volunteer here every week?" He looked toward Lily before answering. "Because once, when my wife was dying, strangers volunteered to sit with her while I worked." His voice remained calm. "They brought her books. They made her laugh. They reminded her she wasn't alone." He smiled sadly. "I can't repay them. So I help someone else." Eleanor felt tears threaten her eyes. The world often celebrated loud generosity. But the deepest kindness, it was usually silent. As dinner ended, Lily slipped her tiny hand into Eleanor's. "You should come back next Thursday." Eleanor smiled. "I think I'd like that." She had no idea that this humble single father had already given her the greatest gift anyone ever could. And Daniel had absolutely no idea that the quiet woman walking beside him toward the shelter doors was the stranger whose life he had unknowingly saved 5 years earlier. Fate had reunited them. But neither was ready for the astonishing truth that would soon turn a simple dinner into the beginning of an unforgettable story. Eleanor returned to the shelter the following Thursday. This time, she parked her car 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. She left her chauffeur behind. No bodyguards. No assistants carrying folders. She wanted to arrive the same way everyone else did, quietly. The moment Lily spotted her through the cafeteria window, the little girl jumped from her chair and ran toward the entrance. "You came back." Eleanor laughed as Lily wrapped her arms around her waist. "I promised I would." Daniel looked up from repairing a loose table leg. "I wasn't sure a billionaire had time for Thursday dinners." Eleanor smiled. "I canceled 2 board meetings." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For soup. For peace." He laughed. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone has ever said about this place." From that evening on, Eleanor became a regular visitor. At first, many volunteers assumed she was simply inspecting one of the charities her foundation supported. But weeks passed, and she never asked to see financial reports. She never made speeches. She never announced donations. Instead, she washed dishes after dinner. She folded donated blankets. She helped children with homework. People slowly stopped seeing a billionaire. They simply saw Eleanor. Daniel noticed the change too. The woman who had first walked into the shelter carrying the weight of an empire now laughed with children, listened to lonely seniors, and remembered everyone's names. One evening he asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" She looked around the crowded room. "Because no one here wants anything from me." "What do you mean?" "In my world, every conversation ends with a proposal, an investment, or someone asking for money." She looked at him. "You've never once asked me for anything." Daniel shrugged. "You already bought your own soup." She burst into laughter so loudly that several volunteers turned to look. For the first time in years, it felt genuine. As autumn slowly turned into winter, an unexpected friendship formed. Sometimes Daniel and Lily would invite Eleanor to join them at the nearby park after volunteering. Lily insisted on feeding ducks. Daniel always carried extra bread. Eleanor admitted she had never fed ducks before. "You've seriously never done this?" Lily asked. "I've attended meetings in 12 countries. That's not the same." "No," Eleanor admitted. "It really isn't." Watching Lily chase ducks across the pond while Daniel pretended not to notice the birds stealing bread from his pockets made Eleanor realize how much of life she had missed while chasing success. She had built skyscrapers, purchased private islands, owned paintings worth millions. Yet somehow, a chilly afternoon beside a pond felt richer than any luxury she had ever experienced. One rainy Thursday, Daniel arrived late at the shelter. His work clothes were soaked. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. "Emergency heating repair. You should have gone home first." He shook his head. "Families here need dinner too." Without another word, Eleanor handed him a towel she'd quietly brought from the supply closet. Their hands brushed for only a second. Neither said anything. But both noticed. Weeks later, the shelter organized a small Christmas celebration. Nothing extravagant. Just donated gifts. Cookies baked by volunteers. Paper snowflakes taped to the walls. Lily stood proudly on a tiny stage wearing a paper angel costume. She sang with the other children. Daniel recorded every second on an old phone whose cracked screen had clearly survived better days. Eleanor watched him instead of the stage. Every few moments, Daniel lowered the phone just to clap enthusiastically. His daughter wasn't singing perfectly. She missed several notes. Forgot a few words. None of that mattered. To Daniel, she was extraordinary. When the performance ended, Lily ran straight into her father's arms. "Did I do okay?" Daniel kissed her forehead. "You were amazing. I forgot part of the song. I noticed. You still liked it. I'll remember it forever." Eleanor quietly wiped away tears. No award ceremony. No billion-dollar deal. No standing ovation had ever moved her the way that simple conversation had. A few days after Christmas, Eleanor attended a routine medical appointment. Ever since her transplant 5 years earlier, doctors insisted on regular checkups. Normally everything went smoothly. This visit felt different. Her physician frowned while studying blood test results. "I'd like to run a few additional scans. Is something wrong? Or being cautious?" Within hours, Eleanor suddenly became dizzy. Her blood pressure dropped sharply. Nurses rushed her onto a hospital bed. Doctors surrounded her. Machines beeped urgently. Daniel happened to be nearby that afternoon. The shelter director had called him because Eleanor's assistant couldn't reach any family members immediately. Without hesitation, Daniel drove to the hospital. He sat quietly in the waiting room for hours. Not because anyone asked him to. Because friends don't leave friends alone. Late that evening, an elderly transplant specialist entered the room carrying Eleanor's medical file. He stopped the moment he saw Daniel. His eyes narrowed. "You." Daniel looked confused. "I'm sorry." The doctor stepped closer. "I know you. I don't think we've met. You donated here." Daniel's expression changed. The doctor looked at the old surgical scar visible above Daniel's collar. "I remember that scar." Daniel instinctively pulled his shirt higher. "It was a long time ago." The physician slowly opened Eleanor's transplant records. Then looked back at Daniel. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My goodness." Daniel frowned. "What is it?" "You were her donor." The hallway fell completely silent. At that exact moment, Eleanor, weak but awake after treatment, stepped out of her hospital room supported by a nurse. "What? Donor?" The doctor's eyes moved between them. 5 years of unanswered questions suddenly collided with one unbelievable truth. He spoke carefully. "When Ms. Ashford received her kidney transplant." He turned toward Daniel. This man was the anonymous donor. Eleanor stared at Daniel as though the world had stopped turning. "No." Her voice trembled. "It can't be." Daniel looked almost embarrassed. I never wanted anyone to know. Tears instantly filled Eleanor's eyes. For 5 years, she struggled to breathe. I searched everywhere. She stepped closer. I hired investigators. I donated millions to transplant research. I begged hospitals to tell me who saved my life. Her voice broke. And all this time, she looked into Daniel's eyes. It was you. Daniel smiled gently. I wasn't trying to hide. I just didn't think it mattered. It didn't matter. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. You gave me years of my life. You accepted surgery for someone you'd never met. You could have said no. Daniel looked down for a moment before answering. My wife once told me that if I ever had the chance to become someone's miracle. He smiled softly. Quote. I shouldn't waste it. Eleanor covered her mouth as tears streamed freely down her face. All the wealth she possessed. Every company she owned. Every luxury money could buy. None of it compared to the priceless gift this quiet single father had given her without expecting recognition, gratitude, or even a thank you. For the first time since her transplant, Eleanor finally stood face to face with the stranger who had saved her life. And in that moment, she realized the greatest person she had ever met wasn't the richest. He was simply the kindest. The hallway remained silent. Doctors, nurses, and patients who had paused outside nearby rooms watched the scene unfold without understanding why a billionaire stood frozen in tears before an ordinary-looking man in worn work boots. Eleanor took one slow step forward. Then another. When she finally stood in front of Daniel, she searched his face as if trying to memorize every feature. You really never knew it was me. Daniel shook his head. The hospital honored my request for anonymity. You never tried to find out. I signed papers promising I wouldn't. But why? Daniel smiled gently. Because if I gave expecting gratitude, it wouldn't really be a gift. Those words struck Eleanor harder than anything she had ever heard in a boardroom. For years she had believed every transaction in life required something in return. Investments expected profits. Businesses expected growth. Charities expected recognition. Even kindness often came with cameras. Yet this man had quietly given away part of himself and asked for absolutely nothing. Not even a thank you. Unable to hold back any longer, Eleanor wrapped her arms around Daniel. I don't know how to repay you, she whispered through tears. Daniel hugged her back with the same calm kindness that had always defined him. You already have. She looked confused. How? You're alive. The doctor discreetly stepped away, giving them privacy. A few minutes later, they sat together in the hospital cafeteria. Ironically, it looked remarkably similar to the shelter where they had first met. 2 paper cups of coffee sat untouched between them. Neither seemed interested in drinking. Eleanor stared at Daniel with 100 unanswered questions. I've imagined this conversation for 5 years. Daniel chuckled softly. I haven't. You never wondered who received your kidney. I hope they were healthy. That was enough. He nodded. I couldn't change who they were. So I focused on becoming the father my daughter deserved. Eleanor lowered her eyes. She suddenly realized she knew almost nothing about the man who had saved her life. What happened to Lily's mother? Daniel looked out the window before answering. Her name was Sarah. Even after all these years, saying her name carried both love and pain. We met in college. We had nothing. He smiled at the memory. Our first apartment leaked every time it rained. The heater barely worked. The neighbors complained about everything. But we thought we were rich. Because we had each other. Eleanor listened quietly. When Sarah became sick, we sold almost everything. Our second car. My motorcycle. Most of our savings. I would have sold the apartment too if we'd owned it. He laughed softly. Funny thing about love. It changes what seems valuable. What you once protected becomes easy to give away. Eleanor understood exactly what he meant. She had spent decades protecting wealth. Daniel had spent his life protecting people. There were nights, he continued, when Sarah could barely sleep. So I'd read books aloud until morning. She always laughed when I did different voices for each character. He smiled. I wasn't very good. I'm sure she loved them. I hope so. He looked down. The day before she died. She made me promise I'd keep helping people. Even if it hurt. Eleanor remembered the words he had spoken earlier. Become someone's miracle. Sarah had never met Eleanor. Yet her final wish had saved Eleanor's life. Without realizing it, tears filled Eleanor's eyes again. I owe your wife more than I can ever repay. Daniel smiled. She'd probably tell you to stop talking about debt. A week later, Eleanor was fully recovered and returned to work. Her executive team expected discussions about acquisitions, quarterly earnings, and expansion projects. Instead, the first item on the agenda shocked everyone. I've decided to restructure the Ashford Foundation. The board members exchanged confused looks. Our donations have always been generous, one executive said. They have. But generosity isn't the same as presence. Silence filled the room. I've spent years signing checks. I've built hospitals I've barely visited. I've funded shelters without meeting the families inside. She closed her notebook. That changes today. Over the following months, Eleanor personally visited every major charity her company supported. Not for publicity. For understanding. She sat with patients. Played chess with veterans. Served meals. Read stories to children. The media couldn't understand why one of the world's wealthiest women kept disappearing from luxury events only to appear quietly volunteering at community centers. Journalists called it a publicity campaign. Those who truly knew Eleanor understood differently. She wasn't changing her image. She was changing herself. Meanwhile, Daniel's life remained almost exactly the same. He still repaired heating systems. Still volunteered every Thursday. Still packed Lily's school lunches before sunrise. When Eleanor offered to buy him a new house, he politely declined. I appreciate it. But we're okay. What about Lily's education? I've been saving. I could pay for college. Daniel smiled. If one day she earns a scholarship, she'll be proud. If she needs help later. He paused. I'll ask. It amazed Eleanor. Most people saw her fortune before they saw her. Daniel saw only a friend. One snowy afternoon, Lily invited Eleanor to attend her school's family art exhibition. Children proudly displayed paintings along the classroom walls. One picture immediately caught Eleanor's attention. It showed three people sitting around a small table with bowls of soup. Above the drawing, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "The day my family got bigger." Eleanor felt her heart stop. Is this us? Lily nodded proudly. I know you're not my mommy. And you're not my aunt. But Daddy says family is made of people who choose each other. So I drew you. Eleanor knelt beside the little girl. I've never received a gift this beautiful. You can keep it. Are you sure? I'll make another. Eleanor hugged Lily tightly. For years she had searched for the person who gave her life. She never expected that finding him would also give her something she had secretly wanted for even longer. A family. Not one connected by blood. But by kindness. By sacrifice. By love freely given. As they left the classroom together, Daniel watched them laughing over Lily's colorful painting. Sarah's final words echoed once more in his heart. Don't let my death be the end of your kindness. Standing there, watching his daughter and Eleanor walking side by side through the snowy schoolyard, Daniel smiled to himself. Sarah had been right. Kindness never truly ended. Sometimes it traveled in quiet circles, disappearing for years before returning in ways no one could ever predict. And neither Daniel nor Eleanor realized that an even greater surprise was waiting just around the corner, one that would reveal how a single anonymous act of compassion had changed far more lives than either of them had ever imagined. Winter slowly gave way to spring. For the first time in years, Eleanor no longer measured her weeks by board meetings and financial reports. She measured them by Thursday evenings at the shelter. She knew exactly which elderly veteran preferred extra crackers with his soup. She remembered the names of every child who came through the doors. She even learned how to repair donated bicycles under Daniel's patient guidance, though she laughed every time she accidentally tightened the wrong bolt. You'd never survive as a mechanic, Daniel teased. I'll stay in technology. Probably a wise decision. Lily giggled. You'd be a good bicycle helper. I'll accept that promotion, Eleanor replied proudly. The three of them had fallen into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. People at the shelter often assumed they had known each other for years. None of them bothered correcting the misunderstanding. One Thursday afternoon, the shelter director approached Daniel quietly. You should come outside. Why? Just trust me. Daniel walked toward the parking lot, confused. Outside stood dozens of volunteers, families from the shelter, hospital nurses, former patients, and several familiar faces from the transplant center. In the middle of the crowd stood Eleanor. Behind her was an old brick warehouse across the street that had been completely renovated. Fresh paint covered the walls. Large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign. The Sarah Carter Community House. Daniel stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the name. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Eleanor stepped forward. I hope you don't mind. Daniel looked at the building, then back at her. You named it after Sarah. She nodded. You told me your wife believed kindness should continue even after someone is gone. I wanted people to remember her. Daniel swallowed hard. But, how? The warehouse was abandoned. My foundation purchased it months ago. She smiled. Now it's something different. The doors opened. Families entered slowly. Inside was far more than a shelter. There was a free medical clinic, a children's library, job training classrooms, a counseling center, a kitchen serving hot meals every day, a workshop filled with donated tools where Daniel could teach repair skills to teenagers looking for work. Every room had been carefully designed after speaking with the people who would actually use it. No luxury, just dignity. Daniel walked silently through each room. On one wall hung a framed photograph of Sarah that Daniel had never seen before. It had been taken years earlier during a charity walk. She was laughing, completely unaware of the camera. Below the photograph was a simple sentence. Kindness lives longest when it's passed to someone else. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I told you those words once. I wrote them down that night, Eleanor answered softly. I never wanted to forget. News of the community house spread quickly. Television crews arrived. Reporters wanted interviews. Most expected Eleanor to stand in front of the cameras. Instead, she quietly stepped aside. This isn't my story. It's theirs. She pointed toward Daniel, Lily, the volunteers, and the families filling the building with laughter. When journalists insisted on asking why she had invested millions into the project, Eleanor answered with only one sentence. The person who once saved my life taught me that generosity is measured by love, not money. She refused to say anything more. Daniel never mentioned the transplant either. Their shared secret remained private, known only to a handful of doctors and close friends. Neither wanted kindness to become a headline. Months later, Daniel was teaching teenagers how to repair old appliances in the workshop. One 16-year-old boy stayed behind after class. My dad says nobody helps people without wanting something. Daniel smiled gently. What do you think? The boy looked around the busy community house. I think, maybe he was wrong. Daniel handed him a toolbox. Then prove it. What do you mean? Someone's heater broke across the street. We'll fix it together. The teenager hesitated. They can't pay. I know. So why are we going? Daniel smiled exactly as he had the day Eleanor first met him. Because everyone deserves to stay warm. The boy nodded slowly. For the first time in his life, he understood. Kindness wasn't something people talked about. It was something they practiced. A year after their first meeting, the shelter hosted an anniversary dinner. The same tables. The same simple soup. The same warm atmosphere. Only one thing had changed. There were far more smiling faces. Families who had once needed help had returned as volunteers. Former shelter residents now served meals beside doctors, teachers, business owners, and students. Kindness had become contagious. Lily, now 7 years old, climbed onto a chair and tapped her spoon against a glass. I have something to say. The room immediately fell quiet. She looked toward Eleanor. Then toward her father. Last year a lady asked if she could sit with us. Everyone laughed softly. I didn't know she was famous. I just thought she looked lonely. Several people wiped away tears. Lily continued. Daddy always says one chair can change someone's whole day. She smiled brightly. So, nobody should ever eat alone. The entire room erupted into applause. Daniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Daniel. Neither needed words. Both remembered that ordinary Thursday afternoon when a simple question had quietly changed two lives forever. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel, Eleanor, and Lily sat alone at the same table where their story had begun. The cafeteria was quiet. Outside, gentle rain tapped against the windows. Lily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder and slowly fell asleep. Eleanor smiled. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if every table had been full that day? Daniel thought for a moment. Maybe we'd have met somewhere else. You really believe that? I do. Why? He looked at the sleeping little girl beside him. Because kindness has a way of finding the people who need it. Eleanor reached into her bag and carefully removed the old hospital bracelet she had kept for 5 years. She placed it on the table. I carried this every day because I thought it reminded me of the stranger who saved my life. She smiled through grateful tears. I don't need it anymore. You found him. No. She gently shook her head. I found something even better. Daniel looked puzzled. What? A family I never expected. The rain continued outside as the three of them sat together in peaceful silence. No wealth. No fame. No applause. Just three people sharing the same table where everything had begun. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with flashing lights or dramatic speeches. Sometimes they begin with a bowl of soup, an empty chair, and 4 unforgettable words. Can I